So let's first look at the glycemic index of regular white refined table sugar, glucose and fructose. Now you might be wondering what's the difference exactly between the three. They all sound like sugar, right? So the refined table sugar actually consists of glucose and fructose. One molecule of regular white refined table sugar, also called sucrose, consists of one molecule of glucose and one molecule of fructose bound together. And so we have, with regular white table sugar, we have a glycemic index of around 65. And then the two components, glucose, we have 100, I said that before. And then the surprise is that fructose actually only has a glycemic index of 13. So, and they sort of level each other out, coming out to 65 for the combined table sugar. Now, right away you might be thinking, all right, I'll only eat fructose from here on, and I sweeten everything with fructose. But that would not be a good idea. So even though fructose has a low glycemic index, it has an array of negative health consequences similar to glucose, but potentially even worse. So it's also a risk factor for diabetes. It increases blood lipid levels, and it might facilitate non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It can contribute to the formation of fructose malabsorption, which is actually a quite common condition anyway. So a large proportion of this society have problem with fructose absorption, which especially is a problem when the fructose content in the diet is higher than the glucose content. So as long as they hold level, they're about 50-50. Most people don't have a problem with fructose absorption because the fructose absorption sort of depends on glucose. And so we want to have a balance of glucose and fructose when we're consuming sugars. And then also, fructose has been shown to be associated with the metabolic syndrome and all sorts of digestive problems, especially again with people who suffer from malabsorption, which can also be acquired by eating large amounts of fructose. So even though it is a low glycemic index food or sugar, we want to avoid large amounts of fructose. So let's look at the next three substances. You're already seeing all the substances and maybe you're making out, okay, I like to use this one and I think this one will be especially good. So let's see if you made a good guess. So honey, maple syrup and coconut sugar. So honey varies a lot depending on the type of honey, again depending on the fructose level, but on average it has about the same glycemic index as plain regular sugar, and which is not surprising because on average it has the same glucose fructose ratio. So maple syrup and coconut sugar actually have a little lower glycemic index, just there under the line for, or under the border of low glycemic to medium glycemic foods. So actually pretty good for a sweetener. And it's not exactly sure why that is the case. Maybe, ideally, there are some beneficial substances in there that slow down sugar absorption, maybe some phytonutrients that are retained in the product from the original plant. But it could also be that due to the limited data, both of them have only been studied in very limited studies, that maybe this is just rather an outlier. So I wouldn't bet my money on it, but so far looking good for those two. All right, now we have rice syrup and agave nectar. Rice syrup coming in with almost 100 and the total opposite, agave nectar, with 18.5. So right away, rice syrup, we can say that's not a good idea. Why is it so high? Because it's almost entirely glucose. Obviously, you might be wondering, how do we make a product from rice, which isn't very sweet, that contains so much sugar? That's a fermentation process. And we add enzymes traditionally through sprouted barley, nowadays just through refined isolated enzymes, and those enzymes turn the starch in rice into sugar. They do sort of the same thing as your digestive tract would do, where you also have enzymes. And so they bite the starch into little pieces, and as you might know, starch is also only a long chain of sugar molecules. And then the process, the producer of rice syrup pretty much does for you what your intestine would do. It breaks down the starch into sugar. And the type of enzymatic process leads to the end result being almost exclusively glucose. So with agave nectar, it's almost the complete opposite. We have a very high content of fructose. So again, even though it's very low glycemic index and it's oftentimes advertised with that, it is not a healthy sweetener due to all the negative effects associated with fructose. Okay, now we have sort of a special one that's not very popular so far, Jacun syrup. And this one only comes in with 40, so low glycemic, very interesting. Let's see if there's anything else going on than just low fructose level, which we know by now is not very helpful. And yes, indeed, there is some other mechanism here. So the reason that it's so low glycemic is that it contains large amounts of fructooligosaccharides. And those are a type of fiber, meaning polymers, also again, sugar polymers, but in a way that we can't digest them. And fibers are oftentimes very beneficial for our health. And most people are lacking decent amounts of fiber in their diet. So that's a good start. And actually, those fibers, those fructooligosaccharides, have been associated with positive health outcomes. And the special thing about them, most fibers don't have a particularly interesting taste, but those ones actually taste sweet. So they can be used as a sweetener, even though they're not as sweet as regular sugar. So that's interesting. One downside though, again, it contains somewhat too high amounts of fructose to really say, oh, that's a healthy alternative. So it contains about 2 times as much fructose as glucose. So especially for people with fructose malabsorption, this might be really problematic. So careful with that one. And so the last 2 ones, I thought maybe we have some more complete foods in here. One natural one and one very refined one. Dates and Snickers. And now you can make your guesses which one comes out with a better glycemic index. And surprisingly, they're almost the same. Now again, what's going on here? Now, both of them have substances that reduce the glycemic index. One of them having good substances, the other one having not so good substances. And let's start off with the Snicker. The reason why the glycemic index is so low is due to the high fat content. So fat is another component that can reduce glycemic index. And the reason is that if we have fat in our food mix, it will slow down the gastric emptying. The food will stay in the stomach longer and will get into the small intestine where the sugar is absorbed more slowly. And thereby the sugar reaches our blood more slowly. But of course, depending on the type of fat, this might not be a very healthy alternative. Now with dates, there's actually a very healthy substance, and again, it's fiber. Not the fructooligosaccharides, but other types of fiber. And on top of that, an array of phytonutrients, so secondary plant metabolites, that have been shown to actually slow down the sugar uptake in our small intestine. So what's our conclusion here? Now today we only looked at glycemic index, the sugar composition of the sweeteners, and a little bit at fiber. But from that, the clear winner are the date fruits. Now I know they're not the most practical and typical sweeteners, but you can actually use them. You can grind them up or like puree them with a little bit of water to get a date syrup. Don't get the store-bought one because there you don't have the fiber in it, or most of the fiber. And you can also buy ground dried dates that you can use similarly to sugar. But tomorrow we're going to look at all the different factors and see how they might influence our decision on the best sweetener. So we're going to look at nutritional values, and we're going to look at satiety, which one actually fills us up the best, and we're going to look at the metabolic effects like on inflammation, etc. So second spot today, I'd say maple syrup and coconut sugar. More on all those sweeteners tomorrow. Thank you so much. Bye bye.